Welcome back to Climate Change Perspectives. Steve, I'd like to start off with you. It's quite easy to say what the future is going to look like and that we're investing in renewable energy, but the point is that we already have many coal-fired power plants, some say that are not really efficient from an energy perspective. What is ESKOM doing right now to change that landscape?
Okay. Well, I think many people are aware that firstly we've got a massive external energy efficiency campaign in South Africa to get users of electricity to improve their consumption levels throughout the economy. And South Africa has already saved the equivalent of one coal-fired power station through energy efficiency. But ESKOM can't expect its customers to do that if we don't do it ourselves. So we have an internal energy efficiency campaign, which is actually part of our compact with our shareholder, the South African government. And that looks at things like our buildings and air conditioning and lighting, but more exciting when you look at the relationship or the synergistic relationship between renewables and coal. So just this week we've launched 3 photovoltaic pilot facilities, one at our Kendal coal-fired plant, the other one at our Letaba coal-fired plant, and then one this morning, in fact, at our Megawatt Park headquarters. And these are solar systems that are feeding renewable energy into the coal plant or into a commercial building with a view to making that coal plant more efficient, because you use electricity to make electricity. And we're going to be using these now to develop the business case for a lot more. And I anticipate that probably by the end of next year, we'll have investment decisions to roll out between 5 and 10 megawatts, which is significant, of photovoltaics at every one of our coal plants. We're then looking at, are we managing the energy in our coal plants properly? So are they operating as efficiently as they can? Do all the conveyor belts have to run at the same time? Do all these motors have to run at the same time? We're changing the lighting in our coal plants to more efficient lighting. We're doing a pilot on biomass co-firing, which means you burn wood together with the coal, wood char basically, together with the coal. And obviously if that wood is produced sustainably, say from forestry programs, well then you have got a renewable energy source going into that coal plant. We're also looking at whether we can use concentrating solar to heat up water, because coal plants work on the basis of supercritical steam. So can you use solar to preheat it, thereby saving some of the coal as well? So these are all initiatives aimed at reducing the carbon footprint of our existing plant whilst we embark on a low carbon future as well.
But, you know, and I hear you, then with the advances that you make in the investments in renewables, if we go back barely a year, the legislation was changed that allowed other power producers, I think to a large extent at the initiative of ESKOM.
Correct.
Are saying, let's bring more players. But then barely a year later, with government guarantees, you raise $1.9 million, 1.9 billion rand from Aly at the World Bank, at the African Development Bank, to come in and play in that same space.
Yes.
Is that because you felt the space creates opportunity, or is it's moving too slow?
I think
it's a very interesting...
It is, and it's something that we struggle with in ESKOM and in South Africa all the time. The point we make about renewables is that, and I've said this before, is that there's place in the sun and the wind for everyone. If you look at the challenges, if you look at the challenges that we have in the integrated resource plan between now and 2030, almost 18 gigawatts of renewable energy. That is a tall order in anyone's books. And so the argument that we have is that ESKOM needs to play an enabling role, needs to play a partnership role. We can act as an anchor with big renewables investments to an industry, the establishment of an industry in South Africa, maximizing job creation, et cetera, and at the same time, we can act then as the single buyer for all of the independent power producers that are going to come into the market. We already act as the single buyer for coal and cogen RPPs. The 3,750 megawatt inquiry, which is much bigger than what we have on our plates at the moment, we will be the single buyer for that as well.
Steve, what's fascinating, I speak to a lot of corporates and a lot of CEOs, and I know that many companies want to embark on cogeneration, and in fact they've been talking about it for even 3 years. But they all tell me the same thing, that we cannot embark on this because we don't know what policy is going to look like and we don't know how this energy is going to be distributed. So in other words, we've lost on energy that could have been co-generated through various sources, for example, Tongaat Hewlett, which is obviously would be quite efficient, and policy is standing in the way. Regulation is standing in the way.
I think it's not so much policy standing in the way as regulation, and there's a distinction. It's a matter of interpreting policy and then putting the enabling agreements in place. And I think that often you'll find that, let's take, for example, the introduction of IPPs. It took a long time. It took far too long. It wasn't a policy gap. It was the ability to translate that policy into regulations and then to include the costs of independent power producers in the tariff. And that happened for the first time when we went through the existing phase of tariff increases, the so-called MYPD2. For the first time, payments to IPPs were included in the tariff. We already have the provision for payments to cogen, coal-based, renewables, IPPs, they're in the tariff already. So that is no longer an obstacle. What is the obstacle at the moment is going through the process and selecting the winning bidders, which closed on the 1st of November, and we'll be hearing those announcements very soon. So you will be seeing things happening quickly from here on. It's been too slow so far.
So we have commitment from ESKOM.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Aly, going to you and listening to some of the issues that Steve has just touched on, the issue on policy and regulation, do you find this as being one of the challenges you face across Africa in trying to get uptake by African governments who are members of the African Development Bank?
Indeed, this is the case, and this is why I mentioned that South Africa is actually playing a very leading role, a pioneering role on some of these things. And one of the greatest advantages of this is that there is so much learning that takes place during the process of transition. And South Africa, given its preferred location within the whole region, would eventually be a sort of a powerhouse where these experiences could be shared and inform other countries that are willing to embark on similar programs. I know, many power utility companies, follow closely the progresses that ESKOM is doing, and they try to learn from the experience. The advantage that we have in the bank, then we're able to also transfer some of these experiences to other countries who have the willingness and the political will to do similar transitional efforts. Of course, South Africa is privileged to have the resources and the institutions that may not necessarily be at the same level of development of some of the other countries. So we are also keen to see what ESKOM is doing to become a success, not just only for South Africa, but for the entire region because of the transfer of experience and the lessons that will be encountered in the way. So long that there is a political will, I think the concerned governments would be willing to make the necessary changes.
In your conversations with your member states, in the run-up to COP, and there's been several meetings by the Ministers of Energy and the Ministers of Water and the Ministers of Environment. What is your reading, Aly, on the opportunity for some successes for developing countries and the Africa continent in particular at COP17? Where do you see us today, a few days from the commencement of the conference?
I'm only comforted by the level of preparation that Africa is going into COP17. I think this year there has been unprecedented level of coordination among African countries, African ministers, to come up with common positions on the critical issues that are relevant and important for Africa. Now, the challenge is that this is coming at a time when there is many and very strong economic and financial challenges across the whole world. And this is coming at a time where Africa is actually growing, unlike in some of the other cases. The challenges are quite different. So I think we'll have to wait and see. But I'm generally encouraged by the level of preparation, and we will have to see really what kind of outcomes.
Mr. Abou-Sabaa, we know that one of the biggest issues, and we've been alluding to it throughout the show, is the fact access to funding so that we can embark on renewable energy down the line. How committed is the AFDB going forward? And perhaps you could solve our funding problems when we look at the rest of the African continent, so we don't have this reliance on the Eurozone, for example, and even the US.
Well, you see, the African Development Bank greatest strength is the operational experience that it has acquired over the many years of working and serving African continent. What we can do is pretty much controlled by how much funding is available. And the commitments that were made in Copenhagen, in Cancun, much of which is still to be seen flowing. So the question of finance is a big challenge. This is why the African leaders have actually tasked the African Development Bank to put in place an African mechanism that would start and eventually grow over time and becomes Africa's preferred avenue for challenging climate finance. This is a process that is still at the earlier stages, and we sincerely look forward to talk to partner countries to see how this could be, funded and capitalized so that it eventually could contribute. It will not be the replacement, but it can only make a contribution, some additional contribution to the needs that Africa would require.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I mean, even just within ESKOM, I mean, you guys have just published some stellar results.
Yeah.
So I don't think funding, and you're not going to be paying your shareholder any money.
Exactly.
So, but the continued momentum of the investments that you've started, and maybe a view on from your strategic position on the outcomes for COP17.
I think firstly, you're right. The strength of our balance sheet is exceptionally important to achieve the things we've been talking about today. A good project is fundable. There's a lot of money out there to put into good projects and good companies that we know will be able to pay that money back. And so the financing can be made available. What do we expect of COP? We've been talking a lot today about mitigation, but don't forget, and what you said in your introduction, is that Africa is very vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. We have to have a bigger emphasis of that in COP. In ESKOM, we look at it, we worry about water, that's why we use dry-cooled power stations. We worry about the impact of severe weather events on the coal supply chain. We worry about the impact on our transmission infrastructure. So we really would like to see things like frameworks for adaptation plans for countries to be put in place. And then the financing mechanism. We've already demonstrated how we've been able to leverage the DFIs, World Bank, Africa Development Bank, Clean Technology Fund, etc., in the financing of our wind and solar projects, and indeed in the financing of innovative new technologies such as our solar project. However, we need a lot more. And that's why the Clean Technology Fund, the Green Climate Fund is so important for us, and we really would like to see progress there.
I'd like to ask you one last question, Mr. Abou-Sabaa, with regards to nuclear, and we know that ESKOM is embarking on a 1 trillion rand investment in nuclear.
400 billion.
400 billion. 400 billion, has that changed now? 400 billion rand investments into nuclear. Tell me, the World Bank is very averse to helping funding with regards to nuclear. Is the AFDB pro-nuclear for the African continent?
We would like to see the private sector and then the commercial producers more engaged, provided that the necessary legal and policy framework within the continent and within South Africa in particular would allow such investments to take place. Given that we have to prioritize our investment, the development money could probably, for the time being, until there is greater clarity, used for more other forms of cleaner energy.
So that's a no then, I would assume. Thank you, gentlemen. We have to leave it there. Great to have you on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
On that note, we've come to the end of this week's edition of Climate Change Perspectives. Thank you so much to our guests, Steve Lennon and Aly Abou-Sabaa. Until next week, from Daniel Kinnear and myself, Eleni, Giokos, it's goodbye.